Hello, I'm John Van Cleve. I teach Russian and German here at Augsburg. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Mrs. Gisela Konopka to an Augsburg audience, many of whose members already know her, either personally or by professional reputation. For 30 years, Dr. Konopka was a professor of social work at the University of Minnesota. During the 1970s, she was director of the Center for Youth Development and Research at the university. She's been an amazingly productive researcher, with 9 books to her credit, on a list of publications and addresses that runs to 25 pages. She's written extensively on group therapy with children and adolescents, on institutional treatment of children and adolescents, on social work training, on teenage pregnancy, and on the philosophy of social work. As a scholar whose work has been translated into 11 languages, Mrs. Konopka has been listed by Who's Who in America for years. She has traveled and taught widely throughout the world. Mrs. Gisela Konopka is having a remarkably rich life, and many a frightened child, many a troubled adolescent has benefited from that life. In her private life, Gisela Konopka had the good fortune to love and marry her late husband, the gifted artist and engineer Paul Konopka. When they met, they were 2 young Germans. He was a Christian, she was a Jew, and Adolf Hitler was the master of Germany. It is thoughts about those times that she is kind enough to share with us today. She has committed her memories to paper in the book Courage and Love. If you're interested in buying a copy, I do have order forms. For students of my honors mini-seminar on the Holocaust this semester, Mrs. Konopka's appearance is an opportunity to hear a witness to the early years of what may be the single most troubling chapter in the history of the modern world. And for all of us, it's an opportunity to reflect on diversity of all kinds by thinking about an advanced Western Christian country that tried to wipe out diversity. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gisela Konopka.
As you can see, I have to have something to stand on. So also remember, I'm only 5 feet, nothing that great, okay? You should know that. And I was told that I'm talking to a very small seminar. But anyhow, so I will give an introduction, but I do hope that you will raise a lot of questions. And I always think that I have to say that I'm speaking as an active former anti-Nazi. That means I'm still an anti-Nazi, but I was active in that I'm not just somebody who was pulled up, but that we were fighting. And that we did underground work in 3 countries, within Germany, in Austria, and in France. Can you hear me? I don't have to. Okay, that's good. And I would like very much that I can say something first about that period and about things that I think are constantly overlooked in history. Because we often think of history only in terms of movies. But there are many other things that we should know. First of all, I always have to say that the Nazis were not just a dictatorship. There are lots of dictatorships and they're bad enough. But they were also what I call a totalitarian regime. But that means everything was in their hands. And consciously, deliberately, and systematically, they worked on it, that there was absolutely no human dignity left for anybody who had different thoughts than the rulers and didn't belong to the master race. Both. People who didn't think like they, and people who were not part of the, quote, master race. You know that I have to say that in quote, but that's the way they called the Germans. And all those, Jews, gypsies, and people who stood against them, were always demeaned and exterminated. I always underline the word demeaned. We always talk about so many dead. Dead, that's nothing, you're just dead. But to be demeaned, to be felt that you are worthless, that's the worst. And it's not true. I have to say these things in the beginning because I think there's so much that we have to understand about that period. It just is not true that people didn't know about the agonizing Nazi terror, but they may not always have known details. Now I have to say something. I'm not talking now about the later time, because in the later time, everything, newspaper, radio, there was no television, was in their hands. So people really didn't know anything anymore what went on. Across the street, you didn't know hardly what went on. But in the beginning, everybody should know, because Hitler had written a book in which he very well outlined what would happen. And that was before they came to power. And the terror tactics showed even before that time, and I will talk a little about that. But later, certainly, there is practically no communication possible. And sometimes there are people who ask me, did you know that person, that's in the newspapers who was an anti-Nazi? I say, no. We could not talk to anybody we didn't know before the Nazis came to power. It was dangerous because there would be always people who pretended something and then became traitors to the cause. So I think, I want to say that in the beginning. Oh, there's the last thing. Now maybe I don't have to tell you that, but I am always concerned that people ask me to talk about the Nazis in the war. Well, they were a long time in power before the war started and before America entered the war. The Nazis started in 1933. So people who tell you that something happened in 1941 that nobody knew about, I shake, because there we had already 8 years of horrible terror behind us. So I thought, I don't know how to do it otherwise. Instead of telling a continued story, I want to do something like throwing pictures. I don't have real pictures, but verbal pictures against the war, so that you get a feel how this started and how it came about. So for instance, I am in Hamburg at that time, I'm quite young, and we stand at our windows and we hear a horrible noise in the street. This is before they are in power. This is 1932, they're not yet in power. And there, you stand there and you hear this noise and you look out and there they are marching in brown shirts with big, shovels that they carry like that because it was forbidden at that time by the Versailles Treaty to have weapons, but they carried those. And we could see even already at that time, and somebody at the corners was looking at them and saying something against them. Those things were flying on their back and hit them. This is before they are in power. And I never forgot that I went downstairs because we wanted to see what was really going on. And there was a policeman who was at that time not a Nazi. And he turned to me and said, half of those are serious criminals. But what will happen when they get in power? And he was right to be afraid. I have to say that the tragedy was that there were no very strongly united forces against them. The ones that I knew were the labor unions, who were very much against them, but not very strong. Maybe some of you have heard about the wonderful artist Käthe Kollwitz. There was an exhibit, I think right here. She helped to speak against them. But many people just didn't want any unity. The labor movement also was split, so this was very, very serious. And the demeaning and torturing of people started the moment they got into power. That's January 1933. And the fear pervaded the country. Everybody, and I exclude certainly the children, knew of it, but nobody dared in the beginning almost to move. I have been back in Germany right after the war under the auspices of the American government. And I wanted to go because I wanted to help young people in Germany. And they were always amazed that somebody who had been persecuted came back. But there were occasionally people who said, oh, but we didn't know. And I very quietly always said, oh, were you afraid to say certain things? Yes. I said, then you knew. Don't ever tell me that you don't know. But the final thing I want to say on that one that I think are such wrong ideas in people's heads is that there was no resistance against the Nazis inside of Germany. Many books are being written now that there was no resistance. Certainly that is nonsense. There was resistance. But what does that mean? How can you do something when all the power is in the hand of those who are in power? Does that make and bring us questions later? But I always feel that for Americans that's almost unbelievable. You know, that there was resistance, and there were people, that includes Jews, who are unjustly accused very often of never having resisted. I remember once I spoke somewhere, and later a young woman came up to me and said, gosh, I'm glad I heard you, I'm Jewish, and I always thought that we just went like cattle, you know, to the slaughter. That's not true, some did, but what could they do when they were surrounded with dogs that would fight them the moment they even made a move? But in general, there were Jews who were in the resistance. There were non-Jews in the resistance. My own husband did much more dangerous things, I think, than I ever did. There were men and women, and it was done out of moral convictions. And against, and I have to underline that, against racial superiority. I have to say that every time when I speak about this subject, I always have to do this and shudder, because some of the same horrors have also perpetrated against non-white people in this country. So you must know that some horrible things have happened everywhere. The decision to become a resistor meant something pretty horrible. It didn't mean just not, again, facing death. I always say that's not difficult. Because death means in the end you don't feel it anymore. That was not the question. But that was much more. There was having to not only think of torture, but to be, while you are doing it, totally separated from the fabric of a country in which you have grown up. The people who had been your friends very often wouldn't talk to me anymore. I remember one girl who was a very close friend of mine who came up and said, I can't talk to you anymore. My father says I must never talk to you because you are a Jew. I mean, this idea, not only because you're a Jew, but also if you took on the resistance, you had to be separated. I think you had to make a decision to not to get married. Now, at that time I was about 20. Remember, you had friends, you wanted to get married. But that's impossible, because what it meant, if the both were in the underground, it was very important that one could separate us, that you could continue if the other one was taken in. So that was one. Not to have children, and we all wanted children at that time. It meant giving up hope, what you would call a normal life, and live all the time with fear and suspicion. So I think that's very important. I always like to read at that point a poem that was written by my sister, who is not alive anymore. She was later killed, but in England, in the war. But she was at that time about 19 years old. And I like to read that poem because it gives you a feel of what one lived with when one was fighting the Nazis. That we have tried, bear testimony, God. That we have tried and stood defeat and laughter. That we have worked until we won and after have tried again, bear testimony, God. And when they grinned and spat and left us weeping and left us all alone and left no love, you, who then must have seen us from above, bear testimony that we were not sleeping. Bear witness when the future judges God, that we were wide awake and worked and tried, and that we conquered even though we died. If you are there at all, bear witness, God. You can feel the incredible strength that you have to master. And when she said we won, it's very strange to me because this was written when everything still looked totally impossible. So what I will do is, when I said I show you pictures, I give some highlights to something that I've experienced, and then you can ask me other things. For instance, I was still a student at the university, but just towards the end, and just before going into the exam, there were several students sitting together. One of them was a very ardent Nazi, and she was talking about how great the time was, that this is 33, how things would be so much better because finally the great Germans would rule the world, and in addition to that, all the Jews would be gone, and all these awful Jewish professors would be thrown out, and all that kind of stuff. And she was talking about the stinking Jews. They smell. Have you ever heard that about other minorities? I always say, if you want to look down on a minority, you always say they smell. So I looked around, I was sitting there, I thought I'd die anyhow, what difference does it make? And I said to her, what do you mean? You never, do I smell? Did you ever smell me? Oh, don't be silly. You're not Jewish, don't tell me. I said, yes, I am. In fact, it so happens my background is the worst Jews, because these are the ones from the East, which were all the Polish Jews, were considered the most lowest on the totem pole. I said, no, I belong to the worst one. This is just an example. This is 33, the beginning, I still went in to take my examinations. And if you imagine, it's a long table. On the one side sits William Stern, who was the psychology professor, who was Jewish. On the other side sits the Nazi in the black uniform. These are the worst. They still let us take the examination, but can you imagine what that means? To take your examination under that condition. That's the beginning. But I'm not. Then comes the time when some of us decide that we want to resist. That was very difficult. What can you do? One thing we thought is that you have to get communication going, because nobody knew anything. So something had to be written and distributed. Now that sounds like nothing, does it? But you have to know that if you are found with one of those things, it means arrest, it means torture, it means dying. So there's always fear, and there is fear often without support. And when I talk with young kids, and you are not so young, I always say, have you ever feared something so terrible? What happens inside of you? And it's very interesting how often I hear, I don't say anything anymore, or I hate them. I want to get a gun. So we see what the horror is, what happens when fear strikes. Then I will go into there are many other things, but I'll go into show you the picture. One evening, several people had already to leave, and we got them out of the country, including the man I loved. And he wasn't there anymore, and we thought we would never, ever see each other again. It was the end, and that was it. But I saw somebody else, and I said, you know, if something happens to me, I have to give you some names and addresses, and you mustn't write down anything. It has to be all in your head so that you can contact other people. And you have to remember, we were not allowed to write anything down. I couldn't live today, but I always say I'm just somebody with a pencil, you know. I can, but at that time, you couldn't. So we talked about that, and I rarely tell that, but I have to smile now because I see so many young people, and we were about your age. And when we walked around, he said, oh, I tell you a joke. Now imagine, under those circumstances, we tell each other jokes. So he said, I tell you a joke. Somebody says, you know, it's terrible at Fuhlsbüttel, that's the concentration camp near Hamburg, because it's all, the people in charge are all the black shirts, these are the worst ones, and, you know, it's just catastrophic. And the other said, oh, if I want to get in, I get in. I hope you get the joke. So this is, we are walking back, and I say goodbye to him. But at night, I was just living in a family. I mean, we all had no money, so I was just having a room in a family. The bell rings in the middle of the night. Now, when the bell rings in the middle of the night, you all know who it is. So I had one piece of paper where I had written something out, and I quick swallowed it, and I can still swallow paper today. And then the landlady opened the door, and they immediately asked for me. Now they come in, you know, 3 huge guys, all in their brown shirts. These were the brown shirts first, and get dressed. I said, would you go out so that I can rest? Don't be silly, you're not worth anything. So, you know, the demeaning again. While I get dressed, while they're staring at me all the time, another one looks through my books and tears out everything. I forgot that, Bill mentioned that. Some nights before, there were some that had looked at books and thrown things around. And somebody said, look at these dirty Jews. They have naked pictures of naked people around. You know what it was? A book about Michelangelo. So, these were those people. But anyhow, so that's what they did. And then they said, you come along. So between those 2 burly guys, I am, and the horror is that I hear them talk about one other person whom I also know was in the same underground, and a woman, not much about my age, and they said, we pick up on the way. They stopped at that house, she came out, and she was very smart. She was not Jewish, which made it a little easier. But still, she was also on the list of the anti-Nazis. And she said, oh, hi, how are you? And then she turns to me and says, my goodness, I haven't seen you since the last time we took care of children. So I knew that she would say that this is what it was and not anything that had to do with politics and anything like that. by the way, that's the only one of my friends who's still alive and is in Hamburg. And a week ago I talked with her, but she's also slowly going down. But I think it's amazing when we talk about it, and I will talk a little more about it. But she was very courageous. Anyhow, so they take you, and they put you against the wall, and you can't turn around because when you turn for a minute, then you get hit. And people in the back of me were very much. And at one point I had heard voices of people I knew, and you must do as if you don't know them. And then you get into a police wagon or whatever that is, and there for the first time I saw people who had already been in the concentration camp, mostly men, and the blood was running over their face. Every one of those faces was bloody. And I knew where I would go. And not only that, I always remember that one of the men was kind of in a cage, and he was totally beaten up. And I always say our eyes just met, and it was unbelievable to see that and to know what was going on. You get into the concentration camp. This is very early. These are not the extermination camps, the one where Schindler's List is, but they're just as bad. People always think only that happened. Again, this happens late. This happens in 40, 39, 40, 41. This was just as bad. It was more like a prison, but the treatment, I saw this huge burly man standing in front of me, and he was yelling at me words that, it was the worst kind, and I just looked at him. And I still remember, and that has helped me all through my life, by the way, that for a minute I thought, hey, I'm wearing a raincoat, and whatever he says just runs down. And it has helped me in other situations where I felt, no, they can't touch me, not with that kind of stuff. But it was pretty awful. He called me the worst names, and there was the strangest things that I did. See, we didn't know a few things. I knew about the underground, especially at that time, because I belonged to that, the kind of the labor unions and the socialists, but there were very religious, what are they? Just a minute. There are women that belonged to the Adventists, you know? And it was unbelievable that they incarcerated them, the same as us. Just why? They refused to say Heil Hitler. They only said Heil to God, but not to Hitler. And I saw how they treated that one woman. They made her for an hour run, and every time they yelled, say Heil Hitler, and she didn't, and she broke down. So I just want you to know this happened in that time already, and it's early. I think, again, taking a few pictures, there was the night of Christmas. I was there in the winter. And it's the Christmas night. They celebrated that beautifully by singing the worst hate songs you have ever heard, by pulling out, especially at that time, still the men, beating them up. You heard the yelling and the screaming and the beating. That was their celebration. And the next morning it was dark, but then there was one woman whom I will never forget. She was one of the people that was part of the staff in the prison, but she treated people decently. She turned on the light, and she said, sit still here, that helps. And by sitting still and staring at the wall, I saw that something was scratched into the wall. And I could read it finally, and it said, those who come after me don't despair. also for us the sun will shine again. You have no idea what that means when the walls suddenly speak to you. So there are these kind of good things too. Somebody had been there before, and then I sketched something. Well, I had nothing to sketch, but that nice woman saw that everything I wore was torn. And she said, I don't let that happen. And so she gave me a needle and a thread. So that was the greatest thing that happened to me in prison at that time. I want to tell two more things, because these are pictures of concentration camps that are early. Already we heard steps back and forth, and for some reason there's always some grapevine. We knew that that person would be decapitated the next day. So there was a lot of cutting heads off and things like that. The point is that they tried to get you to name other people. And I was always told that it's no use, I would be there for the next 1,000 years, and I knew I didn't have to live 1,000 years anyhow. They always talked about the 1,000-year Reich. And that because I was not giving any names, we pretended I didn't know that. The woman who had come into this with me was treated better, and I for a while thought, oh my God, she has perhaps admitted something. But she didn't. And she once did something incredibly courageous. She pushed something under the door, I have to say, and and had written down something what she had said so that we could coordinate it. But I think I should say that because she was such a courageous woman and could do that. And I always thought she was much younger than I, but just in a telephone call I asked again, how old are you? And she said, 1 year younger than you, that's all there is to it. It's not that good. This was Christmas, and then one more picture of the cruelty of that I have to tell you. It was a winter morning, and I heard all the yelling on the part of the Nazis. Always saying, up, down, up, down. What did it mean? I could see something because there was a little hole in the wall, and I could kind of go and try to look out. And what they were doing is literally hunting a man to death. Now, not shooting him, not just yelling at him, but hunting him. He had to run, had to throw himself on the wet ground, and then had to get up and throw himself down again. The most cruel, the most horrible thing. And I saw it with my own eyes, and I'm not making that up. Then finally that man fell, and the hands just, like claws, did this, and the blood spurted out of his lungs and mouth, and he was dead. Hunted to death in that way. And they laughed. That was a lot of fun. I don't think I want to say too much about this anymore. People always say, how did you get out of that concentration camp? It's comparatively a simple story. It has happened to others. After a while, when they couldn't get anything out of me, but they wanted to have me around, they let you go because they think you will meet somebody. And that way they will find something, and this has happened to others in the worst way. So I got out, I had to get back to my place, and didn't go anywhere but to my mother who lived in another city. There are moments that if you want to, I can tell more about it, but it isn't. The point is that we didn't feel we could stop it. I said once, I can't go back into this, but I still will continue. So we continue. And I wasn't good for the underground anymore, because when you are once in their hands, you are dangerous. They follow you everywhere and so on. So the underground to which I belonged suggested that I get out of Germany, where there was somebody in Czechoslovakia who would then see what to do. I should continue fighting the Nazis, but not anymore within Germany. And I have to tell you that I will never forget that there was one man who had been a teacher and who was always a very kind of, I always thought, a cold guy. And he met me said that he wanted to follow me business, that I go on a train, so that he knows that I really had left. And he was already under terrible Nazi surveillance, I'm sure. Very courageous, incredible, and I have never forgotten. There's a beautiful place in Berlin, I saw it 2 years ago again, where women stand with big baskets of flowers. And he bought a bunch of violets and said, there has to be something good you have to take out of Germany, so that you don't think everything is bad. And it's only a few weeks later that he was taken, and this man was decapitated in Berlin. And I saw the place where that happened 2 years ago. But I just want you to know, these are they're very human moments that are quite different. And I will go pretty fast not too long. First into the time in Czechoslovakia. The horror to me was that in a place so close to Germany, there were a lot of people who thought, oh, it was wonderful, great Germany, they are just wonderful. Finally, and this has happened here too, I have met people after I got here who said, wasn't that great, they gave it, not power, they gave it pride again. And this was right there. So when we think people know everything, they don't, or they don't want to know. And that was in Czechoslovakia, and this is a whole other story. I agreed that I would continue fighting, and the organization that worked with all this said, please go to Austria, because that will be the next point where we have to fight. And that's quite another story. I will not go into detail, but it was a horrible decision to make, because meanwhile I knew that my husband wasn't my husband then, but had also to leave the country, meanwhile had gone to France. But the idea at that time was you go where you are told, because you must do what has to be done. And I will not go into detail, but Austria still today sometimes said, oh, we were overrun, we poor Austrians. No, not such thing. There were just as many Nazis there as there were in Germany. And I was in Vienna and I saw it with my own eyes. I was at that time so poor that I lived always on 1 potato a day. And I hate potatoes, by the way. But I saw it. For instance, a young woman with 2 Nazis on both sides and a stamp on her brow. I slept with a Jew, and they took her all around that everybody should laugh and yell at her, spit at her. I saw just unbelievable things. Women who were young Jewish women who were pregnant were pulled out of their house and they were taken to scrub the streets. The Austrians were very happy. I don't say the Austrians because again there are people who stood against them, but a lot of them greeted them with open arms, and I'm not going into all the details. There was an underground certainly in Austria too, and we had contact with them, and a friend of mine and I, we kind of got together to stay in one place, and she went to France, came back with a whole bunch of leaflets and was caught at the border. And was immediately put certainly in prison, but since she had the same address as I I was taken into. So it was the idea that I thought it's the end again. I will not tell too much about the Austrian prison, but compared with the German concentration camp, it was much better, I can tell you that. It was strange, because this is the period when the Nazis were not yet completely in power, okay? Some part was still there, some was not. So I can tell sometimes almost funny stories about that. But there's something that I think about the human beauty. There are good things about human beings that I've never forgotten. I was put into what they also called a city concentration camp, and I was in one room, a room almost as big as this one, all by myself, because I was the only woman. All the others were men. And the poor things, every time I had to go to a washroom, they had to all disappear and all that kind of stuff. That's silly. But anyhow, that's not the point. But the point is that when I was very cold, and one man had persuaded the person in charge that the stove should be lit in my quote room. And he came and did it and left newspapers lying there. And I was not allowed to read anything. So I grabbed that newspaper, and there on the side of the newspaper, he had written the most encouraging things. Don't fear anything, we are all in this, maybe something will get better, that kind of thing. I never forget that a human being did it under those circumstances. Oh my goodness, I talked to them. Oh, I'm going very quick. This is Vienna. How did I get out? I was in police headquarters. But I get out, and then somebody says, we have arranged with the people underground in France, we have arranged for you, somebody will meet you in Innsbruck and help you over the border. I will not go into detail. But we don't know each other. And I have to smile today, because today you couldn't do that. But they said, you wear white gloves and she will wear black gloves. And then that way we will know. Today I don't think you can leave this white gloves. But the point I want to make on that is only that this was a young woman. And she was looking at me as if I was something fabulous. And she was Swiss. And I said, what? Why do you do this? This is very dangerous for you too. And she said, no, it's nothing for me. I said, who are you? I won't give you my name, but all I can tell you, I'm nothing but a little minister's daughter. And that's all I know about this woman who has helped me to get out. Very complicated and very quick now, because I want to have time to raise questions. Coming into France was terrible, for the simple reason that there were a lot of refugees, that there was a lot of fight among them, political fights, just like everywhere, and it wasn't easy. I did see Paul again, but then they were arrested again. I'm not going into all that. The war starts again. I have to go. So I will not go into any of this, but I will again tell you something that I think we should know about the goodness of human beings. We were hidden by French peasants, but we had nothing. And so one day he said, my God, Paul says, I have to work something. We have not to eat. I mean, we lived all the time on those blackberries. He never wanted to see a blackberry in his life again when we were out of this. But that's what we lived on, blackberries. But he said, we have to do something. And somebody said, they need woodcutters, because so many French were in the war and just weren't there. And we went out, and there was a French farmer. And we certainly were hidden by the village under all names. So finally we said, we will have to tell you the truth. We are really German refugees, and so you can hand us back, because the Germans were everywhere, to the authorities, but this is what we want. And so I want to share with you that this French farmer, who had only one leg, pointed to that cut-off leg and said, that leg was shot off in the First World War by German guns. But I don't believe that one says all Germans are bad, all French are good, or anything like that. They are all different kinds. You are not Nazis. You are standing with us against them. So, and this is what I thought all my life is very, very important, that we never generalize about people. And I can go into Spain and Portugal, and I don't know, go into all that, it's getting too long. But perhaps I want to summarize something. And that is, I have never in my life been able to say only Jews were persecuted, because that's not true. Others were persecuted too. All Germans were Nazis, that's not true. Many were, no question. And I have to say, I always say, there is no nation in the world that I know, no race that is without any guilt. And none of us is. We always have done something that wasn't. But people can overcome that, and they can when they have courage and really believe that. And so I kind of like to end this when I say that no speech about the Holocaust, and I probably haven't told everything I want to tell, no memorial should ever end only with the memory of the dead and the torture. It should and always end very thought through and denunciate all the evil that comes from race superiority of any kind, thorough rejection of the absurdity that I think of the myth and the conceit that any group is better than any other, any religion better than any other, any gender better than any other, any nation better than any other, any race better than any other. I think we have to take a stand always against the horror of those. And we must work, I think, on friendship, not just fighting, and appreciation of variety. I always loved Alan Paton, you know, that's a writer in South Africa, when he said, if people do not touch each other, they will hate each other someday. And I like this idea that we all have to touch each other. Now, I don't know whether I talk too long, but you can ask questions. Okay?
When I was driving her over here, she said, I hope they ask questions. Ask questions. Ms. Konopka, one question always is, could it happen here in the United States?
Do you mind if I sit down? You have seen me, I'm so tall. Easier first when I sit down. Just give me. It's difficult. Oh, that's nice. Thank you, that's good. Yeah, but that can happen. It can happen anywhere. It has happened in some place in the United States. When I'm reading about periods in the treatment of Afro-Americans, I want to sit there and cry. It's so awful, okay? So don't say it can't happen. But there is one, I always say, the United States has 2 or 3 great advantages over any country in Europe, and especially Germany, I think. One is, it's huge. I think that's very good. There's so much diversity, even not racial. Just huge diversity. I think that's a great advantage. The other thing, it has a great diversity. I mean, there's terrible anti-Semitism, anti-blacks in this country right now. But there are always organizations that fight it. And they should fight it early enough. So that's one. I'm not saying it cannot happen, but it has advantages, you know. And the third advantage is a different history. because I'm right now, because I'm pretty upset about what goes on in the country, read very carefully the American Constitution and the amendments. They are amazing. You know, this is something that I think every American should read and reread, because it's really there now. It doesn't mean it's always kept, but these are the things that I think will make it less complicated. I don't say it's impossible.
How did you keep in touch with your husband with all the movements around?
We didn't. We always thought the other one had died somewhere. We really didn't know. I always talk about our little miracles. I tell you one, there are all kinds, very strange. For instance, in France, we had completely lost each other because I had gone with, that's a long story, but anyway, I was in southern France. He had been interned in another part, okay? And we had no communication. And in this book, I mean, I think what he wrote is the most beautiful one. Because he's going on the road, trying to go out of France into Spain and Portugal, you know, to fight on. And on the road, at one point, he's walking, living only on green grapes. On the road, to see somebody on a bicycle that looks familiar, the back looks familiar. So he runs, catches that man, and that man knew where I was. That's just one of the examples. But there are other examples. It's really unbelievable. It's not real. But this is weird. No, most of the time we could not write to each other. I always say, people here, even when we were in the United States, when the United States entered the war, Paul wanted to go and fight again, and he did. He became part of the American army. And I always said, my God, we could even write to each other, you know. That was so unusual. Yeah.
I'm taking a women's studies class right now, and we're talking about systematic prejudices and discriminations that are built into education and media and so many things that we're surrounded by that you kind of take for granted. What gave you the courage to speak out about some of the injustices? Was it your parents supporting you? Was it literature that you read? What brought about the courage to join the underground?
It starts earlier than the Nazis. I have to say that I can't remember a time in my life that I didn't feel very strong about injustice. Even as I can give you examples, but I will not right now. When I was 8 or 9 years old. Now my father was part of the socialist movement, you know, but he wasn't always, he was also a tyrant on the other hand. So I'm not saying that you get all of it, but you get some of it, right? A lot of reading. And always remember, we were very early part of movements. This is not that strong here. But we were always part of movements that fought for justice, for internationalism, you know. I was asked the other day to write an article about what it meant to go from my homeland to get into the United States and read social work, and I started out by saying it wasn't so different. I'm a child of the revolution, you know, the fighting the Kaiser, the emperor. So this is very early. That you are finally really scared to do all this. I have always felt that way. You have to do it, whatever. There's no, I know that I can't give you a specific. It's just you can't let people be mistreated. I saw some of the things here. I came to Pittsburgh at a time when The pools were not allowed. Black children were not allowed in the pool. Boy, I went and I checked out and I found that the law actually said that they were allowed. So I went with the kids. Well, we had to fight. It's just to do it. Support, yes, you have to have support from some people who think the same as you. You can't do it just.
It's true, isn't it, that there was a young people's movement in
Yeah,
Germany in
very early.
in the teens and 20s
That's
that,
right.
that you were very active in.
That's right. And, you know, all the labor movements had youth organizations and stuff. And very early. See, that I didn't talk about right now, but I tried to write it here because there were youth movements that were from the beginning very idealistic. This is non-Nazi youth movement. Questions, come on. I haven't said everything.
What do you think?
Yeah? Well,
What do you think of what's going on today?
you have to talk very loud.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
very old.
I'm sorry. What do you think of what's going on in the Middle East today between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
What's going on in the East today between the Israelis and Palestinians?
That's a very sad thing, isn't it? And it's much more nationalism than, than something else. But I think I'm very much against it. And I do know that there are many Israelis and also many others on the other side that want to be together and fight that. I have been in Israel, not recently, but, sometime before, and there were fabulous groups of Arabs and Israelis together. It has to be fought. I think that, well, that's my opinion. The person in charge is not somebody I like right now, but there are lots of people who want it different. So there's still hope. But it's very difficult. It's such a tiny little piece. See? It's not a big country. It's very difficult. But I think they could work it out.
Actually, I have a,
Huh?
I have another question.
You have to talk about
I'm sorry, I have another question. Seems like the whole matter of Holocaust is widely spread on the Western Hemisphere, and you usually don't hear about what happened during during World War II in China. So what do you think is the difference between Japanese war crime in Asia compared to German war crime?
It's the question, why don't we, do I see here right? Why don't we hear as much about what happens in Japan, right?
Well, not in Japan, but Asia in general, by the Japanese.
China. I think I hear a lot. If you want to know, you can hear it. I think I'm always very pleased that we have a free press. I have read a lot about it. It's not that we don't hear about it. It isn't, how should I say? I think the business of the Nazis was such a contrast to what happened before, because it was a very free democracy, right, after, that people are really horrified about what happened there. But they should be just as horrified, I think, about what happens in other countries. But I always think there's quite a lot written. But maybe not enough. And people should tell about it and see who is mistreated, It should be done. It's everywhere that it has to be done. The people who know about it should talk about it.
That's a question.
You wanted to say that.
Yep. When I was reading Goethe's whole night, I read that he waited 10 years after his experience to start writing about it. And I'm curious about how did you come to write your book?
Well, first of all, you talk about Eli Wiesel's night. I'm one of those people who is not very pleased with the beginning, especially because everybody says, oh, the Germans didn't believe it. Well, they didn't believe it either when somebody came and told them what went on, right? people don't like to hear that something terrible happens. So I always say, we should not keep saying only the Germans. It's they themselves that were not always listening. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. This is not written, this is published very late. I wrote it almost after I got here, which is now 50 years ago. But I have to say, I wrote it because I didn't want to forget. But there are two things. First, I didn't want to publish it because I always think nobody should go around showing off, and it looks like a show-off, But I didn't want it. But that was another point. I submitted it to several publishers. But most publishers want only to hear of persecution of Jews. This is not that kind of a book, is it? It doesn't say that only. It says lots of others were persecuted. So that wasn't so, how should I say, fashionable. So it doesn't matter. Those who want to read it will read it. Did I give you an answer?
Yeah.
Huh? No.
You did.
Okay. Yeah.
I had a question. We read so much in the news about things going on, like in Central Africa now and Eastern Europe, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people being killed, and we just read about it or hear about it through the media and go on about our normal day. And that, I'm guessing that isn't too far different from what a lot of people did back then in this country. And what it was like for you to think that here you are going through all this, and was the United States like, what was your impression of what the United States was and what people were thinking and what was going on here, and why weren't people getting involved or something? I'm not sure. I guess I'm just curious about how you envision countries outside of the war and what was going on in the rest of the world.
Well, I want to be very honest. I don't think we thought about the United States. I mean, you're out in the middle of all that. You can only say what you have to do here.
Yeah.
No. We were very angry, I remember, when the French allowed the taking over of the, that French part that was state, the Rhineland.
Right.
But that's right there.
Yeah.
And we thought they were right sitting next door, the idiots, But the United States, remember, for us, I never thought that I would see that part of the world. I mean, that's terribly far. I grew up in Berlin, I never thought I would get to Paris, We didn't have money. What I'm saying is, we were international, okay? But more in the sense that you read about it. I do know that before the Nazis, we did know about what we thought was I still think the mistreatment of Afro-Americans in the United States. So that wasn't exactly an ideal country, to think of. Because that was where I feel very strongly still today about any kind of racial superiority. But I can't say that we knew about it, but we didn't really get that.
It's interesting how we know so much more now. Like when something happens in Serbia, we know about it on CNN 15 minutes later.
You are so right. It's totally different communication.
Yeah.
But I have to admit that I feel sometimes very guilty because I don't know everything either. Just yesterday, I talked with a friend of mine. I said, I feel like I'm really stupid because in Yugoslavia, the old Yugoslavia, I certainly was on the side of the Serbs because the Croatians were the Nazis. Has that changed totally? I don't even know. So, but I would have to really immerse myself into knowing that. You're absolutely right. I did not think that all the countries, didn't think that all the countries, they should have taken let me see what we thought. We thought that when they were refugees, there should be places they could go. I had a friend who was a refugee from, and not Jewish, from Germany. Got an asylum, as many of us, in France. Then France becomes impossible. He cannot get anything in England, You know, he slept months on the borderline. That we knew, We hoped America saved us. We would not exist. There was a committee that had names of people who were in danger of being killed by the Nazis. And they put those names out, and there was a very courageous man that finally I find out he gets written up. I hardly knew his name. I only saw his face. His name was Fry. He was from the Unitarian Service Committee, and he did an awful lot to get people out. So this way, yes, we were safe that way. You understand? But that we didn't expect all the political facts.
This is going to sound like a very strange question, but what was it like when you finally got together with your husband-to-be and you finally met? What was your feelings on your wedding day to finally be there with him?
I can't read it. I wrote that. I will give him a booklet. No, because on our 25th wedding anniversary, I wrote it down. And I put it in my booklet. So I can give you that. But, well, it was absolutely happened. It was just, you have to know that we were not coming over here together. I came, and then the ages and all this stuff. I have to say that, but the boat, the boat on which he was, there were refugees. They didn't know that the other half of the people on the boat were Nazis. It was a French boat that was going to Martinique. And it was going to Martinique and then to the United States. And they didn't know. But when they were on the wave, on the ocean, these Nazis had already persuaded the French, because they were under Nazi rule, that they will take them not only to Martinique, but will immediately incarcerate them. So, they're the strangest thoughts. What happens is that I was there, but in the middle of all this, there is a Dutch boat that starts shelling that boat, which flew under French flags. Remember? They were enemies in the war. So the Dutch were holding that boat. My husband later said, you should have seen how the typewriters flew into the ocean, because the Nazis had everything written on the typewriter. And the Dutch boat took them all prisoners to take them back to South America. Now, there were other Germans, but my husband comes from the northern part of Germany, so he can speak Low German, which is similar to Dutch. So he could communicate and explain that they were not the same. And when they came on the soil of, I forgot which country it is, in southern part, it was under British, they belonged to Britain. They wanted to put them all in an internment camp. And the anti-Nazis said, you do that, and the next morning you only will find cut throats. They'll cut ours, we cut theirs. So then the English separated them. And meanwhile, people in New York knew about all that and contacted the ambassador, and that's the way it became. So it's another story. An awful lot of stories. But, it was incredible to see each other. And certainly, we had no that. But Americans were very, very kind. I have to say that. People always say, sometimes they're not, but we were lucky. They were kind. There were committees that worked on that. That's a whole other story. Because I always say it's very important to remember that we were decently treated by poor, but we were, we were not interned. We were sure we would be interned in the war. And we were not. It's awful that they interned the Japanese Americans. Isn't that terrible? I mean, we knew how awful that was. That's a racial discrimination. But we were not. And Paul became an American soldier. We have to look over that. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Next question. How has your religious belief changed at all through all of them?
Now, this is a difficult question. I very early have questioned religious beliefs. I know this is a very honest answer, okay? You must not, first of all, don't ever think that the Nazi persecution of Jews was a religious persecution. That's an absolute lie. And it's a myth that is perpetrated by what I consider some very conservative people. It was not. It was a purely racial persecution, okay? The Nazis didn't care what religion you were. There were people who were good Christians, but their grandfathers were Jewish. That was considered a race question, okay? So that's number one. So it has nothing to do with that. But the religious thing that I could talk with somebody like you and others for many hours. I have great difficulties even today in that to belong to just one denomination, okay? That has something to do with a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, a lot of questioning. I cannot say, I will never say I'm not religious, but I don't know. I have read a lot. I don't like a lot of stories in the Bible, and this is, we could go now for the next 5 hours talking religion, because I have, and I like, one of my best friends is a priest, and he says, I think more about religion than anyone else he knows, but that's not true. It's not true, but I cannot belong to just one group. But don't ever think that the Nazis persecuted Jews because of religion. See, they persecuted the gypsies. What was that? It's race. Anybody who was not belonging to what they call the master race.
My second question is, how do you feel about survivors of the Holocaust and how when the Germans took away so many of the things, valuables and then put them in Swiss banks, I believe it is. Swiss banks, I believe that they put them in Switzerland, is that correct? And now many survivors are trying to redeem them back.
It's their business, I don't know. We never had any money, so I don't know. Let them make that decision. I don't have anything. My husband once said something very good. He there was all this thing about help making good or anything. So I said, how can they ever make good with money? What happens? But, and that's a good sentence, I remember, but for us it is no. Yeah?
What's your sense about the Holocaust denial movement? Do you think that is increasing or decreasing, or?
It's horrible. They're liars.
Well, I know that, but I mean, I wonder if you think that's gaining ground at all, or losing ground, or?
You mean whether it's believed?
Yeah.
Well, there are always some people who want to believe it. But that's why I'm not going around only talking about this. But I speak up, and people do speak up, and I am grateful to those who make the good films about it. And I have been back in Germany several times, and not as a guest only, but I worked on the re-establishment of youth work and so on, and we needed to talk about that. But most people that I met knew about it. As I think I mentioned that before. When somebody said to me, I didn't know it, I always said, were you afraid? And if they said, yeah, they were afraid, then I said, no, you knew something. Don't tell me. And there are still people alive, like I and some others, who can tell them. But people don't want to believe something, they won't believe it.
We're now 50 years away from the end of World War II. We're now 50 years away from the end of World War II. If we were to go out 50 years from now, what are people then going to be saying about this silence that we might be doing now?
What if we would go on 50 more years? What would people be saying that was silent about what's going on now?
We should say it. I think we should talk about slavery. Always. That was a while ago, so not quite that long ago. I think we should always. That doesn't mean to say, you did it. I always thought that. I always say, no, I'm not blaming the grandchildren or something. As long as they don't go around and say it never happened, that I will blame. But otherwise, no, I don't think they're in the right holding that against somebody. I have I want to say young man, but they're not young anymore, meanwhile they are also big. But he came here, and I remember, at that time, short after the war, and I remember he said, stood there and said, I gave him something, and he said, oh, I don't know what to do, because you see, I was selected for one of those special schools that the Nazis did, where they developed their leaders. He was a youngster, but he was apparently very good for them, and he said, if we had won the war, maybe I would kill you, And I said, but you didn't, and you tell me it. And I met him some years ago, and he was again almost crying, because he said, look, I said, you have to stop that. You didn't do it. We can't hold it eternally against you that you were selected, I don't believe in always holding it against everyone. I always say the children and grandchildren, that they should know about it. But that's there, just like I think people here should know about the treatment of Afro-Americans. There's no but about it. They should know hiding it. That doesn't mean that you are guilty. I don't say that. But you must know about it so that it doesn't happen.
Would you comment on what ways the Nazis were an aberration and what way they were a continuation of the anti-Semitic feeling that was so strong in that part of Europe, Poland, Russia, Germany?
Oh, well, there was very strong anti-Semitism in all these countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need only to read the story of the Crusades It's one of the most cruel stories of humankind, you know. They're terrible. Humanity apparently needed scapegoats all their lives. It's not very nice to know that. And so it isn't just in Germany. It was in Poland, it was in Russia. I personally have always said, I'm not going around always blaming the children for the sins of their fathers. But that doesn't mean they should know about it. And historically, yes, there has been in that part of the world a very strong anti-Semitic history. In other parts, there are other, we have had other things. Some of you know about the Turks and the Armenians, That doesn't mean, I remember when I was in Turkey once, there was a woman, she said, I was in the United States and everybody talked to me what we have done against the Armenians. And she said, but I didn't live then at that time, You can't do that to people. But you can say, remember it so that it won't happen. That's all I can say. Yes, there is a strong history. Yeah?
Being in social work, did your experience have any effect on who you advocated for?
Yes,
Did your experience in Germany have an effect on who you advocated for as a social worker?
I don't know what you mean.
Like who you support more, who you work for the most, who you, like you said you work a lot with children. And is that because when you were a child?
No, I think, my special interest in children and adolescents comes from very early. I once was prepared to be a teacher. No, that's from very early. That was not. I think the experience of the Nazis has driven me more, though it was already there early, into concern with prisons, institutions, and so on. And I'm horrified what we sometimes do in institutions. It's just terrible. But no, that has not that much. I have had other interests.
Dr. Konopka, I know you've given a great deal to adolescents and youth. That's been a major interest of yours. What about the neo-Nazi movement and movements like the skinhead, which are very much impacting adolescents around the college age youth of today in this country and around the world?
You say there is a lot of Nazi influence right now?
The neo-Nazis and the skinheads.
Worries me very much. But I think we have to work at it. Very. I think, we could go for hours, but I think our present hostility towards young people feeds right into that. The more we are beating people, the more they will beat back and become hateful. So I think that's why I'm horrified at some of the institutional treatment, at all this business, that they all have to toe the line. So I still talk about that. Yeah. No, I'm very scared of this kind of thing, the skinheads and all that. But I can just beat them up. I have to say, what are we doing to them? Yeah?
It seems like throughout your entire experience, you've maintained a faith in humanity. How have you maintained that faith in the good nature of people?
What you really raise the basic question. That's very
He's
good.
very smart.
Yeah. No, I don't. See, there's a change. When I was a adolescent, I still see my later husband on bicycles. I'm just telling you that. And he would argue that people are born bad and that one has to make them better, you know, that kind of thing. And I would argue, no, people are born good, and he just makes them bad, you know, that kind of stuff. I don't say that anymore. This is very early thinking in my development. I don't think that way. I don't think people are good. I think people are both. Good and bad, and considerate and inconsiderate, mean and generous, you know. We are all kinds of things. I think what we have to do is in all our work is to help strengthen the side we think would be helpful to each other. So I'm not somebody who says people are good and they will come out good. No. Does that make sense? That's a much too short answer. That needs an awful lot of thinking. And right now I'm getting very tired of all this stuff about nature and nurture. I don't know what they're fighting about. It's both. It's perfectly clear. Why we still have to prove anything? No, it's both. It's our job to think, and I had to give a major 10-minute speech last week. I don't have it with me. But it was, I made very strong the point that it is our job to clarify in us what we think the world should be. It can be a religion, it can be, you know, whatever we want to call it. And what I'm trying to always say, if we want to have only warriors, like in Sparta, you know, we educate people that way, and that's what they become. And if we want to have everybody be a nice, complying, obedient person, we'll have what we had under the Nazis, because I still think a lot of that comes from this education of obedience. I haven't talked about that, but I am very scared of people who are always only listen to what somebody tells them. You know. If we want to have people like I want, that they start thinking and that they start caring, then we help them to find that way. Whether we do it always right is another question, but we try. Nothing is perfect. But I'm very wary when somebody asks me about working with adolescents right now, how much there is. You do that, you toe the line, or, you know, will not do any good, you will have Nazis. I know. Because that's the way one creates them. That was, I still think a lot, it's not only anti-Semitism, a lot was an education of total obedience. Again, not everybody, okay? There are always differences. Very strong. And I will say something that came very late to me, then now you can throw me out, can I say? I think also the incredible consumption of beer. I mean, you know that the Nazis started in Bavaria, and were strongest there. It's not because Bavaria is the country that is that way. It's this incredible consumption. I've never thought about it for a while, but I see it. It's totally taking away any judgment. You do what somebody else tells you, and you become very, it's interesting, and I don't even say alcohol, I just say beer, because it makes people so compliant, you know, or it makes them so greedy. I don't think they could have beaten people like that if they had been under that. Now, you know, I'm not somebody who can't drink a glass of wine or something, but it seems there are other reasons what we are doing. But there was a pervasiveness of this obedience thing. Germany was a very, now again, not everyone, that's why he said that I came from the youth movement, which was very different. But we were fighting our way from early on. That sometimes takes a lot of discussion.
Maybe another couple questions, we'll let her go over here.
I was interested in finding out what was similar or different about your experiences in Spain and Portugal?
I didn't have much experience at those countries. I only went through them to get to the United States. What I saw was in Spain the horror, total fascism, and all the poverty. I mean, I saw children lying in the street with swollen stomachs, hunger. But I only saw that. I had no experience doing it. I only went to school in Spain. Portugal was very different at that time. It was not under the same kind of total fascism. It was much less of that. And I was a little longer in Portugal. I can't tell you anymore how long, but I would say maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks. That's good examples of helpfulness, but I couldn't say much.
Question?
Oh, thanks.
I have more of a comment than a question. It's probably going to take me like 30 seconds to say or a minute, but when somebody asks, could it happen here again in America, I think we have to rise above the term Nazism and just think of in-groups versus out-groups, how an in-group will try to, get everything for itself, and sort of haves versus have-nots. And this could happen with us in America, and maybe you could call it fascism, but a lot of us who are, middle-aged see the difference between when we were the age of these kids and now, and really see a creeping fascism in our country. And I don't think it's an unusual thing that you're speaking today on the very day that there's this, to me, a frightening hearing going on in Washington in our own Congress, this against Clinton. And you had a feeling of powerlessness in the early 30s, and I have the same feeling of powerlessness now to stop what I think is just really insanity going on. And like you mentioned, the demeaning. And ever since Clinton came into office, there's just been this demeaning. And I see it as these kind of blue bloods just hating this common man who got in there. And the trampling on the Constitution, you have somebody like Trent Locke standing up and saying that, well, any bad conduct is, can be impeached. And that's, how can we not be rising up in outrage when we hear that kind of a comment? And the trampling on the people, they didn't begin Nixon's impeachment hearings till the public polls had gone down to 24%, and that's in our paper this morning. And now the polls are way up high, they're just disregarding the people. So, we have to be very alert to what's going on in our own country. We have to read the papers and see the parallels of this kind of right-wing thinking. Because to me,
I totally agree with you.
Great.
And I'm very, very worried when I hear people say, there was somebody, I said, did you go voting? Oh no, I never vote. I mean, it's scary to hear that. And people who don't, somebody said to me, oh, I never read the newspaper. I say, so, if anything will happen without that you know. Oh, I agree with you. I think we should do that very early. I don't know whether there is much in the schools that is taught about, what's happening. I always, when I was working in children's institutions, I always said, let the kids read the newspaper and they report at lunch a little bit for everyone. But interest them,
One more question. Russ, watch out. This is Russ. How have you kept going? What's your motivation? Why have you kept doing all of these things and been so active from when you were 20 until now? I guess my question is, why?
Because it's wrong. I can't give you another answer. I'm feeling terribly guilty. And now I sometimes know my friends because I say I feel so guilty that I don't do this and I don't do that. And they say, my God, you are 89 years old, so how much do you want still to do? And I say, no, it's true. I once in a while just go to bed, But it's true. It's just, it's there. Yes, but you know, that's not so unusual. I have heard other people say, why did you help these people under so much danger? They say, because it's the right thing to do. There is no other reason. It's not just your nature, you know. It's something that you just must not do. You cannot see somebody beaten up and not do anything. You cannot see somebody, I mean, I can't help it. I get so upset what goes on in some of our delinquency institutions, you know? But I don't do anything anymore. I'm not going there. I can't let other people open. It's true. I don't think I do enough anymore. But I feel very bad that I can't do it anymore. No other answer. I gladly think about it more.
I have to say thank you here twice. First to Jeff Stafford and the Student Activities Council for their support in putting this together. And then I want us all to thank Dr. Konopka for coming, please. So that she'll remember us here at something from Augsburg College. I'm sure you don't have another mug, so now you have a mug.
So heavy, it's making.
Thank you all for coming.